What's up, YouTube? This is True Raw for TV. Please disregard if you hear any noise in the background. Got some stuff going on here as far as family members here. Um, Before I go further, I want to give a shout out to two of my subscribers for contributing to the channel. I want to give a shout out to Melvin for his contribution to the channel. Much respect, Melvin, for contributing to the channel. And I want to give a shout out to Aram. Aram contributes frequently to this channel. So once again, Aram came through with a donation. Much respect to Aram. I want to thank everybody that has been signed up over to the Patreon. Um, Upload a video this morning on the Patreon. I'm thinking about uploading another video tonight. If not tonight, tomorrow. It might be tonight. I want to thank everybody that's signed up to the Patreon. It's only $2 per month. There's already, I think, over 320 plus videos on the Patreon right now. So I want to thank everybody that has signed up and support me over here, over there on the Patreon as well as on the YouTube. All right, so thank you guys. So this video is really just this it's not a big deal, okay? But I just want to respond to something that someone sent me, one of my subscribers, and it's probably a website that you guys have heard of. It's a blog spot, actually. It's called Nobody Touches Jordan. And I've read it, and I agree with a lot of stuff that's up there. Um, However, my stance on the whole GOAT thing has changed in the last 4 or 5 years. At one point, I was very partisan in the GOAT debate, probably like 10 years ago, when I was very partisan with it. Now, even though I still hold the opinion that I think personally Jordan is the GOAT as far as NBA basketball, I do think that when you add in high school and college, that it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I also want to say this: almost every player that's in your typical top 10 has a case for GOAT, even if it's not a strong case. The top 3 to 4 players all have a case for GOAT. You know what I'm saying? In my opinion. So it's not like it's one guy that's clearly above head and shoulders above everybody else, and nobody else has a case in your top 3 or top 5. There's other people that could be considered. This thing is, in my opinion, fluid, and it's subjective to the person who you ask. All right. The only problem I have with Nobody Touches Jordan is that he speaks about Jordan being the GOAT as if it's a fact. And I don't agree with that notion. Okay. Um, One thing I've always learned to do is to be flexible in my thinking to a certain degree, and to be able to argue from more than one side of an argument. Okay. Look, so this is the thing. He has a section up there on his blog spot, where he blogs about Wilt Chamberlain, and he basically, he kind of takes a shit on Wilt, man. And I've noticed this to be more of the case since Wilt Chamberlain passed away. Ever since Wilt Chamberlain passed away back in October of 1999, there have been a lot of people who have shitted on Wilt, spread lies about him as far as his game, repeat common misperceptions about his era. And over time, as people who actually watched him play pass away, things get repeated that aren't very true. They're not true at all. And at the end of the day, his standing has dropped from the point where he was often seen as the GOAT to top 3, top 5, top 10, and now it's to the point where he's not even in some people's top 10 anymore, which I don't understand. I mean, I understand people have their opinions, but I don't know exactly what they're looking at. Look, um, if you're going to be harsh, all right, this is my thing. If you're going to be harsh on on Wilt Chamberlain, right, for not winning enough championships, then maybe you need to penalize Shaq and Akeem Olajuwon more. Okay, some people consider Akeem Olajuwon the premier center when it comes to skill, right? Now, Olajuwon played 18 years in the NBA, 1984 to 2002, but yet he only won two championships. And people will say, quickly tell you, well, yeah, but, he didn't have the most talent around him compared to other guys. Um, he didn't have another superstar teammate for the most part. He did have Ralph Sampson, but Ralph Sampson didn't materialize to be the player that everyone thought he was going to be based upon his college career. But he did have talent around him. Okay. And one thing that I find disconcerting about Olajuwon is that 9 times in his NBA career, his team was eliminated in the first round. But the argument can be made he didn't have generally and consistently the best team around him. The same argument can be made about Will Chamberlain. From the time he played in the NBA, started in 1959 until he left the league in 1973, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 years, he did not have the best team around him. The best team, as everybody knows, was Bill Russell's Boston Celtics. If you have the best team by far around you, chances are you're going to have an advantage. All right. So this is another thing I want to say. Um, Even though I think it's more media manufactured over the past 5 years, especially since James and the Cavaliers beat the Golden State Warriors, you've seen this James versus Jordan thing or LeBron versus Mike debate, which is a total media manufactured hype show. Okay. Now, before that, I'd say from 2006 until 2011 is when it was at its peak, and then it started fading a little bit. And by 2015, they were subtly switching the narrative. But from 2006 to about 2013, at least, it was Kobe versus Mike. Now, the media, as I said before, like to act like that never existed, but it did. Now, let me ask you something. This is how disingenuous they are. If you're making Kobe versus Mike comparisons as GOAT, right, then you're insinuating that Kobe's number two overall, correct? So why is it these same idiots now say Kobe's not even top 10? Now, before Kobe, started rising, and before Will Chamberlain passed away, it was the 90s. I'd say it was Chamberlain versus Jordan. That was the GOAT argument. Even though Kareem should have been in there more, it was more Wilt versus Jordan. So how is it that Wilt has fallen from the consensus GOAT to top two to top three, top five, maybe top 10? Now he's not even top 10. Now, nobody touches Jordan says that, in his opinion, Wilt is a top five all time center and a top 15 all time player, which I find sort of ridiculously low. But when you're a Jordan fan, you know, and I know this from talking to Jordan fans, I know the psychology of most of these Jordan stands. Wilt is a thorn in Jordan's side because Wilt, nearly on a per game basis, is able to match Mike statistically when it comes to scoring per game. Plus, his numbers are more gaudy. He shoots a higher percentage, far more 50-point games, and he was able to dominate in other areas, which is unbelievable rebounding. And he was also a great passing big man, one of the great passing big men in the history of the NBA. That part of his game always tends to get, underlooked, overlooked. And of course, he was a great defensive player. So the thing that they usually do when they penalize Wilt is talk about championships. Well, he only won 2 championships, right? But then Jordan fans say they don't like to play they don't play that ring game. You know what I'm saying? It's not about rings, it's more than that. But you're playing the ring game when it comes to Wilt. So I noticed another thing that he mentioned in the article is that when it comes to playoff series, Wilt is only 1-7 versus Bill Russell, and he's 0 I think he said 0-2 versus Willis Reed. In 1972, Willis Reed was injured in that series. Okay, so he penalizes Wilt for being injured. I mean, for Willis Reed being in that series and saying that it really shouldn't count. Well, look, what he doesn't mention is that Bill Russell, as I said before, throughout his career, played with 12 Hall of Famers from 1956 to 1969. And Willis Reed, as great a center as he was, let's see, how many Hall of Fame teammates did Willis Reed have? Well, let's see, you have Dave DeBusschere, Hall of Fame, Jerry Lucas, Hall of Fame, Bill Bradley, Hall of Fame, Earl the Pearl Monroe, Hall of Fame. Not only is he in the Hall of Fame, Earl the Pearl Monroe was the premier ball handling scoring. He was the Kyrie Irving of his day. Okay, and Walt Clyde Frazier, a complete point guard, can score, great passer, great defensive player, first team all defense every year. That was their starting lineup. That's a super team, right? That doesn't get mentioned. Well, you know, with the exception of a couple of years when he did have a team around him, and that's when he kicked the shit out of Bill Russell, by the way. His teammates generally were guys like Tom Gola, an old Paul Arizin, Guy Rogers. Um, you know, yeah, true. He did have Nate Thurman, but when he was playing with Nate Thurman, Nate was still young and developing as a player. So it's misleading. He's putting names out there, but not telling you at what times in their careers he was playing with them. And even when he did play with Jerry West and Gail Goodrich and Elgin Baylor, they were all on the downside of their careers, especially Elgin Baylor. When Wilt was playing with Elgin Baylor, he wasn't playing with the 1962 version of of Elgin Baylor, excuse me, that was dropping 35 a night. Or excuse me, 38 a night. That version of Elgin Baylor was dropping 38 points a night. Excuse me, scoring 40, 50, 60, 70 points in certain games, grabbing 14, 18 rebounds a night. He was a colossus, a monster. By the time Wilt was playing with Elgin Baylor, he was dropping maybe 20, you know, 18. Um, very much slowed by the knee injury he suffered in 65, 66. Jerry West was getting older. It was an older team. Now he penalizes Wilt Chamberlain for winning the title in '72 with the Lakers with Willis Reed injured, but he doesn't do the same penalizing, say, Bill Russell winning that title in '69 with Wilt Chamberlain in Game 7 having a leg injury, nor do they penalize, or does he penalize, the Knicks winning the title in '70, being that Wilt missed, I believe, most of that season with an injury, the type of injury that ended careers. See how that works? But you can't play that shit with me. Okay. Then from reading his article, he goes into about how Wilt's numbers aren't really that staggering, and he talks about rebounding percentage and how Rodman's a greater rebounder than Chamberlain and Russell. Let me say this: I do think that Dennis Rodman, by the numbers, is probably the most dominant rebounder. But Dennis Rodman didn't have to worry about scoring. You know what I'm saying? Dennis focused on defense and rebounding. Wilt had to focus on scoring, defense, and rebounding. Okay, he was doing a lot out there, an absolute lot. Um, so I'm pretty sure if Wilt was just focusing on rebounding alone in his prime, he could have averaged maybe 30 something rebounds a game. All I know is this: whenever Wilt Chamberlain went up against Bill Russell, Russell averaged 14 points and 22 rebounds. Wilt averaged 30 points and 28 rebounds. So who's shutting down who? That's another lie that Bill Russell used to shut down Wilt. You know what I'm saying? No. From what I saw, 1-on-1, Wilt Chamberlain averaged 30 points and 28 rebounds. I think something like 4 assists, and he shot almost 50% against Bill Russell, the great defensive uh, legend, Bill Russell. Against Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell did average 14 points and 23 rebounds, 22 or 23 rebounds, but he shot a measly 37% from the floor. And this is a guy that's not really a shooter, a scorer. The difference is Bill Russell's on a team that has Bob Cousy and Bill Sharman and John Havlicek and Sam Jones and Tom Heinsohn and all of these other pieces, Casey Jones, Tom Sanders, earlier on Frank Ramsey. Uh, you know, he's playing on a team with all these different pieces, and Chamberlain doesn't really have a dominant secondary score. He doesn't. Whereas the Boston Celtics, they had several players that were capable of dropping 20 something points a game. And then there's another thing too. I saw something where he was talking about Bill Russell having dominant individual games in the finals, whereas Wilt sometimes struggled in the playoffs. Well, look, man, if you want to penalize Wilt for struggling sometimes in the playoffs, why is it that Dennis Rodman wasn't as dominant a rebounder in the playoffs as he was during the regular season? That's one question I pose. Okay. Another thing, when you're a big man, it's so much easier to stop you rather than a perimeter guy. The perimeter guy always has the ball in his hands. Whereas when you're a big man, you got to rely on the point guard to give you to dump the ball off to you. When you're getting doubled and triple teamed all the fucking time, like Will Chamberlain was, you're being mauled. If you actually watch some of those fucking games, Will sometimes have two or three guys hanging around him, hanging off of him. Okay, it was a totally different era. You know what I'm saying? He was constantly double and triple teamed. They intensified that shit in the playoffs, and that's why Wilt's numbers went down because a lot of times he didn't even get the fucking ball. That's why he would only have 18 points or 27 points because he wasn't getting the ball as much, as opposed to an exhibition game where they kind of was going through the flow of it. So they weren't going balls to the wall trying to stop one guy. And in that situation, you got to start looking at everybody else. Why is nobody else stepping up and scoring? Because they didn't have another guy that could fucking do it. Now I'm not going to bring up advanced statistics and metrics and all this type of shit, um, because over the years I see numbers as important, but a lot of these analytics and these advanced metrics, you know, they mean something, but sometimes if it's not told in context of the era, then a lot of this stuff just doesn't make any sense. Okay, um, I know he toyed about how one of the reasons why the numbers are so inflated in Wilt's era is because of pace, and he said that when Wilt played, teams only shot 40%, whereas today they shoot 50%. Or during Jordan's time, excuse me, teams shot 50%. That's not that accurate. That's not accurate at all. First of all, when Wilt Chamberlain came in the NBA in 1959, 1960, teams shot collectively, the NBA shot 41%. Okay. But by the mid 60s, that number was around the mid 40s, 44, 45%. Wilt Chamberlain's last year in the NBA, 1972-73, I think it was around 46%. Now, that's not the highest, but it's certainly not what they shot in the 40s and 50s, which was in the 30 percentile, the 20 percentile. Okay. Now, look, in the mid 1980s, that was the peak, I believe, when Jordan first came to the NBA. That was the peak for efficiency in the NBA. This was the heart of the Lakers era, Showtime Lakers. The league average was 49 plus percent, almost 50% as far as shooting the basketball. Even though the 3-point shot was in flux, people weren't really shooting that shot, and it was mostly taking it to the basket, scoring in the post, and mid range. But when I say mid range, I mean more along the lines of you know shooting from the high post, a little bit outside from the high post, as opposed to 20, 21 feet out. That's why field goal percentage was so much higher. Now, during the 90s, it actually dropped. Whereas in Wilt's era, field goal percentages were rising. During the dominant era of Jordan, it began to fall. By the time of the Bulls' 3 championships, that number was around 47% shooting. You can look it up. And during the last 3P for the Bulls, it went down to 45%, 43%, 46%. Okay, look it up. It actually dropped down to figures that were lower than in the 60s and 70s, or about the same. So the only thing that was different is pace. As a matter of fact, things are inflated now. So are you insinuating that, you know, you know, that these numbers are inflated today, which I do believe, but you're saying that scoring and assists and rebounds are inflated today because pace is much higher. Today, you know what I'm saying, they're taking 35 three-pointers, 3-point attempts per game. During the Jordan era, it was 14 3-point attempts per game, 15 3-point attempts per game. Teams are averaging about 112, 113 points a game. Back in the late 90s, it was, I think, around 96 points per game. So numbers are inflated. So are you saying that today's numbers shouldn't be discounted? Because you can't just discount Wilt's era, but not discount today's. And he brings about the fact that, Wilt has a losing record against Bill Russell. I said it before, and Willis Reed. But Jordan fans don't like when you say, well, or Jordan stands. They don't like when you say, well, Bill Russell, excuse me, Larry Bird is 0-6. Well, Jordan is 0-6 against Larry Bird. Isaiah Thomas has a winning record against Michael Jordan. See, when you bring that up, what do they say? Yeah, but Larry Bird had Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale and Dennis Johnson and Isaiah Thomas had Joe Dumars and Dantley and blah 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 blah. But okay, that's true. That's very true. But why do you guys not give the same, you know, consideration to Will Chamberlain? You know, I'm gonna end the video on this note, man. Look, Wilt Chamberlain had a lot of things that you can criticize about. Okay, maybe he didn't go as hard and play as ferociously as he could have. Okay, but these are the facts. Wilt Chamberlain was a skilled basketball player. He's not this big dope who just got the ball, and to compare him to JaVale McGee is a disgrace. This is a guy that had a hook shot. He had a fall away jumper. You know what I'm saying? He had a finger roll. He had, range, especially when he was younger, out to 16, 17 feet. As he got older, he changed to a more power game. He played better, in my opinion, than Bill Russell did playing like Bill Russell. Why? Because he was more efficient. Bill Russell shot 44% for his career. Um, Never got higher. That's another difference. When Bill Russell entered the NBA in the 1950s, that 44% was about league average. Bill Russell never improved in his field goal percentage. Wilt Chamberlain did. Wilt Chamberlain came into the NBA shooting 46% from the floor, which was much higher than league average. Toward the end of his career, he was shooting over 70% from the floor. All right. Wilt Chamberlain was a dominant rebounder. By the numbers, he's a top three all-time rebounder. If you're looking at raw rebounds, he's the greatest rebounder. He was a tremendous defensive player. He was an awesome offensive force. Okay, he finished averaging 30.1 points per game, but you have to remember that he decided to eschew scoring and become a playmaker, overall player, and then more of a third or fourth, fifth option player by the time he played with the Lakers. Okay, um, so he could have, if he had the James Harden mentality and said, "No, I want to keep scoring," he could have finished averaging 36, 37 points per game for his career, legit. Okay, but he chose to change his game, and he would still be the all-time leading scorer. The 1972 Lakers won the championship not necessarily because they were a super team, but because they were a great team. That team was old, the 72 Lakers, but they were a great unit, a great team. Okay. Um, by comparison, the 72 and 73 Knicks were a younger, fresher team. And by 1972-73, the Knicks actually were a more talented team. Even though people like to talk about, oh, they were the super team. This Laker team that has Chamberlain and West and Goodrich. The Knicks starting lineup, every member is a Hall of Famer. They were the super team. Like I said before, Earl Pearl Monroe was like the Kyrie Irving of his day, and Walt Clyde Frazier was like the Gary Payton of his day, but a more potent scorer in a lot of ways. Okay, with a better jump shot. That was their backcourt. So, in conclusion, I'm gonna say this, man. Wilt Chamberlain may not be the greatest. He's the most dominant, and he does have a case for being the GOAT. Because, like I said before, whenever he was paired with talent, he won. Bill Russell only dominated, for the most part, in those finals. I forgot to mention this earlier, because he was playing against the Los Angeles Lakers in those finals. And everybody that knows anything about those Lakers teams in the 1960s, as great as they were with Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, they were weak at the center position. That was their weakness. And Bill Russell did what he had to do. He would drop 25 and 20 rebounds and take advantage of the mismatch. But that was the reason why he put those numbers. He never really put up big. I'm not saying he didn't have a game where he, you know, might have done well against Wilt, but for the most part, he wasn't doing it against Wilt Chamberlain. But Wilt Chamberlain was doing it to his ass. You know what I'm saying? Wilt Chamberlain was a freak of nature. This guy could run a 4.3. This guy could bench press 550, maybe 570 pounds. This guy had a 50-inch vertical leap in his prime. Even off when he was 36, 37 years old at the end of his career, and he basically was pretty much operating off of one leg, he still had a 37-inch vertical leap then. You know what I'm saying? Guy's a fucking freak of nature. He could have came back and played in the NBA when he was 50 years old. Teams were still coming at this guy in the 80s. So, you know what I'm saying? The fact that people are shitting on this guy, talking about he played against 6'4" midgets and all this is bullshit. Unbelievable bullshit. This guy played against more Hall of Fame centers than Shaq or Hakeem Olajuwon. But it is what it is.